What they did, Sinohydro did, they brought in to Ecuador 3,500 prisoners. Pay attention. Slave labor, who are supposed to commute their sentence by working at these hydropower facilities. The locals that went and worked with them and stayed with them for a little while, they didn't last long because they said that the conditions in which they hold those prisoners are inhumane, that should not be allowed. And so we were subjected to the same conditions because we were put in the same camp than the prisoners. And so what happens? They have very little food and very bad quality food. The accommodation is shocking. And the amount of abuse and violence that happens against them is just unbearable. So they left because there was nothing happening. Again, what they do explain is that, and this was not only by locals that were affected, but by scientists that have been doing the study on the Coca River and all the impacts before the construction of the hydropower, during, and now afterwards. And what these scientists did come up with was saying, they're the ones that were speaking about 3,500. They were saying that another huge social problem is the sexual abuse and the sexual violence towards local women by all these sexually hungry men. Not only that, but there was a huge militarization of the area, meaning the Ecuadorian government brought heaps of military. Why? Because it considers that plan, that project, the Coca-Codo Dam, they considered a national priority. So what did they do? According to the studies, to the people that did the studies, these dams are aimed at the extractive industries. So you have 3 different pipelines, oil pipelines, from 3 different companies, OCP, Oleoducto, and Petroamazonas, that run across many 80 kilometers or more, hundreds of kilometers, through in front, on the edge of the river. The problem is that they built this dam in a seismic area. They have 3 volcanoes around them and on very unstable ground. So what has happened is that those 3 pipelines have cracked in 3 different or more sections. And the amount of crude oil that went out of them polluted all the waters. So now the locals who depended on the river, and the ones that are crying, are saying, excuse me, we don't have any fish. All the fish disappeared from the Coca River. People cannot use the river. That was the water source. They have no water supply. Apparently, some of the companies brought a big container of water for 1 month, fortnightly for 1 month, and then they stopped bringing potable drinking water for hundreds of communities, indigenous communities and colonizers, non-indigenous people that live along the Coca River and depend on that river for water. So you're going to tell us that with your new sustainability standards, this is going to change? What dam developers do and what the extractive energies that they are providing the electricity for do is they're interested in profits. They're not interested in people. And the sustainability standards and all this accreditation is not enforceable. Who's going to enforce them? So that's a huge lie that has to be put to rest. Every single one of the statements done by the sustainability standards and by the accreditation system are voluntary, therefore unenforceable. But why did they do this? Why did the hydropower industry publish all of these documents before and during the World Hydropower Congress? Why did they do the Hydropower Congress online? So that over 5,000 people, especially aimed at bankers and investors and manufacturers, could be part of this. At least 7 different presenters of the hydropower industry very clearly said the main aim of this Congress is to bring about social acceptance of hydropower. In other words, is a propaganda to make hydropower look so good that then there would be more acceptability, because they themselves also say that in the past few years the hydropower industry has gone downhill because of the huge environmental, economic, and social costs and damage that it creates. So then this was a huge propaganda, including their San Jose Declaration, which at the end of the Hydropower Congress, at the closing ceremony, they offered a copy of it to Mr. Alok Sharma, the president of COP26 and the president of the UNFCCC. And Mr. Alok Sharma took this beautiful document and said, this is fantastic, basically. This is essential for the transition to zero carbon by 2050. This document shows how sustainable and how important it is to develop hydropower so that we can do the transition, supporting solar and wind, so that that transition can happen to net zero by 2050. First of all, there's no industry that is going to do net zero. Let's be clear about that. Okay? So another thing is that they say, Mr. Alok Sharma, and I'm aiming this to you, Mr. Alok Sharma, because I thought this was the most egregious comment, was that Mr. Alok Sharma congratulated Laos in the Mekong River, the main dam developer in the Mekong River, for its fantastic service to humanity and to climate change through its massive hydropower development in the Mekong region, and how it was helping the development of low carbon technology and spread it throughout Southeast Asia. Okay. Laos is a tiny little country that shares the Mekong. It's landlocked. It only has about 9 million people as a population. It has now active over 78 dams in tributaries, and it has been building dams unilaterally against the wish of neighboring countries, may we add, in the mainstream of the Mekong. Okay? Now, not only is it choking the main artery of Southeast Asia, which feeds and gives the livelihood to 65 million people so that it can make profits, to try and pay the debt to China, who's loaned them over $4 billion worth of money. And the Nikkei index, the Nikkei economic index, was done on the amount of debt of Laos to China for its hydropower development, and it showed that it's going bankrupt. Laos had to pay this year $1 billion per year to China. That's on interest. So this year it could not comply, did not have the money because of COVID. It didn't have the money to pay. So what it was pretty much forced to do was to sell its electricity company to China, give it 51%. Nice deal for China. So now China actually has the control of the electricity that is produced by Laos through mostly hydropower and coal-fired plants. And now there's a few new floating solar panels, which is fantastic news, but there's only 2 happening. So how is Laos going to pay $1 billion next year? And every year for the next 25 years. So the economic costs to Laos to develop hydropower are absolutely astronomical and ridiculous. Okay? Another thing that Mr. Alok Sharma doesn't know is about the impacts that this has caused to people. Within days of Alok Sharma praising Laos online to the world, Laos put out a publication saying Laos has had a 70% reduction in poverty. Okay, let's look at that for a minute. It is absolutely true that there's a reduction in poverty. For whom? For government officials. The people of Laos have been doing complaints to Radio Free Asia and other outlets, news outlets in the area, that claim that that many government officials are creating these huge mansions in Vientiane and in other places and drive the last models of cars, of brand new cars. But that money is not going to the people. And that is the problem. In the case, for example, of going back to the Amazon of the Coca-Cola Sinclair, the people were saying, wait a minute, we are in front, living right next to the biggest hydropower plant in all of Ecuador. We're supposed to be having the best electricity being produced and given to us. However, the electricity is so erratic that, and it is so intense, the discharges of energy are so intense that all our electrodomestic products have burnt out. We keep on throwing out televisions, we keep on throwing out fridges, music equipment, because it burns them out. So instead of having the best energy, we have the worst energy. So we have opted to go back to our little diesel generator for electricity. Then you had 20 families that came and spoke and said, well, the representative of 20 families said, we don't even have electricity. Same thing in Laos. They preach that everybody in Laos has got, that 90% of the people have electricity. Not true. According to the latest socio-environmental studies, this is not happening. Another thing that happens, another amazing thing that is happening is that the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, Nature Conservancy, American Rivers, and all these big organizations on energy are saying that that rivers should not be harmed to save the climate. That there are some rivers that have to be protected and that they should be left out of boundaries for the hydropower industry. Within days of publishing that. And that there's another thing that they preached and that is so important and so well seen, because it was that there's now a new whole booklet called No-Go Zones. No-Go, hydropower is not to go into World Heritage areas. Okay? The representative of the World Heritage Commission gave a webinar to which I put in the questions and answers a question saying, okay, so then what's happening with the Luang Prabang Dam, which is meant to be built in the mainstream of the Mekong, only 25 kilometers north. Here's the dam, and here's one of the most divine cities I have visited on earth, which is the Luang Prabang World Heritage Area. And the World Heritage Commission had threatened Laos that they would remove the World Heritage status of Luang Prabang if they went ahead with that dam. In the same way that they threatened to remove the World Heritage status to the Great Barrier Reef if Australia continued doing the pollution with coal plants, with coal and gas. In both cases, they did nothing. That was just to pretend they were doing something. So that then Laos sent them, as soon as the World Heritage Congress, the World Congress on Hydropower was finished, they sent a new environmental impact assessment to the World Heritage Area. So then I said to her, so what's happening? What is the World Heritage Commission doing about this dam going ahead? Knowing, and let me make this clear, that this dam is being sited in a geological fault line. That means a crack in the earth, meaning a seismic area, an area prone to tremors. And only a few months ago, there was a 6.8 tremor, 8 kilometers from where they're going to put that dam. What that means is that if there's another tremor of that amount, because the soil on the ground of the river is very unstable, if they're going to put a dam there, and they already gave the go-ahead, as soon as they got the praise from thank you, Mr. Alok Sharma, very grateful to you. If there's any disaster, it will be on you, mate. Sorry to say this. But it'll be on you, it will be on the World Heritage Commission, it would be on all these international organizations that are promoting hydropower. Because if that dam breaks, it would create a tsunami because it is so large, it's a mega dam. It would create a tsunami that would totally wipe out not only Luang Prabang, but the hundreds of communities that are on both sides of the river, all the way to Cambodia, as already did a dam collapse, which was not actually the actual dam wall that collapsed. It was only a tiny little bit of a shoulder of the dam that collapsed. And that was enough to create an absolute environmental disaster and social disaster. So, Mr. Alok Sharma, I want to inform you, because clearly you have not studied anything to do with the Mekong River, and I don't blame you for it. So this is why I'm informing you, that as a result of that breakage of that tiny little bit of the dam, not even the wall, but the shoulder of the dam, there were over 7,000 people made homeless. There were hundreds of deaths. And it impacted on communities all the way to Cambodia. This went through Laos, affected Laos, Thailand, and Cambodia, thousands of kilometers south. And these people, these 7,000 people that are homeless, were taken to a resettlement makeshift camp. Some 3,000 of those people became desperate after years of waiting for compensation and the promised houses by the dam developer. In this case, it was not a Chinese developer, it was a Korean developer and a Thai developer who did not pay enough compensation. They said, oh, we gave them a little bit of compensation. Nah, there's no houses. So they've been stuck in these subhuman conditions for 4 years, and Human Rights Watch, the United Nations rapporteurs on food, on home, on environment, all of them put a huge decree, a statement very recently, now in November, exposing the impacts of hydropower and the human rights violations that these imply. Okay, so now there's still 4,000 people there waiting for the promised houses, living with very basic and very bad quality food giveaways, somebody that gives them food and very little water. And this is what you are praising Laos for, Mr. Alok Sharma? Keeping 4,000 people in subhuman conditions, and this is just an inconvenience for a great benefit for the planet by dams that are emitting enormous amount of greenhouse gases? I say to you, is this ethical? Is this even allowable? Oh no, but it's an inconvenience. We have to look at the benefits. To whom? To whom, Mr. Alok Sharma? To the industry that is already a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And the industries it supports, its extractive energy industries it supports, gold mines, all sorts of mining extraction industries. So we're just going, the plan then is for COP26 to provide the investment, the money, the funding of $100 billion per year to the hydropower industry to continue the violation of human rights of communities, to destroy fisheries, to destroy biodiversity, and to sink the delta. Because let me tell you something else. The delta in Vietnam is at the end of 4,000 odd kilometers of the Mekong River. It ends up in the Mekong Delta, that is like this, and the Mekong, and that Mekong Delta ends up in the South China Sea, where they're having a lot of the problems there between China and the other geopolitical problems that are having in the area. Okay. One of the problems of the hydropower dams is that they retain sediments. It means the sediments are withheld by the walls. And those sediments are the ones that are producing all that nitrous oxide, according to the Chinese studies. Just saying. So those sediments are little pellets of gold. They carry the nutrients that enable the primary production of the ecosystem. It means it keeps it productive and it fertilizes the land and fertilizes everything it touches. So the beauty of the sediments is that they reach the delta of rivers naturally. That's when there is no dams blocking them. And then because the deltas are actually wetlands, yeah, then enough deposition of those sediments keep them above sea level, because we have a problem with climate change. There's an increase in sea level, there's a sea level rise. So that means that seawater, the delta, is sinking by lack of sediments, so much so that there's hundreds of thousands of hectares that have been lost in the Mekong Delta. So instead of being like this, it is now truncated like this. It means that all the houses and all the rice paddy fields, the orchards, deltas are extremely productive precisely because of the incredibly rich fertilizers that those sediments bring and deposit on the deltas. The Mekong Delta has been known as the food bowl of Southeast Asia, where 20 million people live, Mr. Alok Sharma. 20 million people used to live, but 1 million already had to migrate because their houses and their lands went underwater because of lack of sediments by the hydropower industry that you're claiming it is so wonderful. And I'm being extremely strong here because, above all, I believe that water and food are basic human rights, and they need to be protected. And you cannot say that this hydropower industry is going to save the climate when it is absolutely false. Absolutely false. If anything, if you insist in creating in the next 20 years all those hydropower dams, you're going to increase methane and nitrous oxide into the atmosphere, and you're going to make the situation worse. You're going to increase climate warming. And another greenhouse gas I have not spoken about, which is important that I mention, is called water vapor. There was this study by this, that it was very interesting, a talk in a webinar given by a hydropower representative for Africa, Rocio Gonzalez, and she was saying that in Africa, for example, from only 159 hydropower reservoirs, there was a loss of 42 billion cubic meters of water. From only 159 hydropower reservoirs. Hello? The planet has got thousands upon thousands of hydropower reservoirs from which water is evaporating. There was a very interesting, that anybody would like to read, report last month by Scientific American, in which they explain hydropower, about water vapor and the impact of water vapor and evaporation on increasing climate warming. So what happens is the water evaporates because the hot weather makes it go up in vapor. And then what happens is that when it comes down, it holds energy called latent heat. So when it rises again, it means that that latent heat that was brought down through rain or little bits of frost in the early morning releases these bubbles of hot air that increase climate warming. Thank you, Mr. Alok Sharma. And thank you too to our ex-Prime Minister, who has been putting out that we need, and for that they did have 3 webinars, Malcolm, anyway, that we need to create new, what they call the pumped hydro storage, which would be essential to help solar and wind systems. Malcolm Turnbull, our ex-Prime Minister, was one that is preaching and promoting this new version of hydropower, in which you have to guess what? You need a reservoir anyways, or a river. And then you're going to extract water from a river, drill massive tunnels through mountains, which is a huge environmental damage, and then pump that water up using solar and wind, which is a total waste of energy, and create a new reservoir at the top of the hill. So we're talking of an increase in reservoirs through pump hydro storage, because they claim that it's the only reliable source of storage. Okay, and they also claim that that hydropower plants are reliable and stable sources of energy. We said before, there has been a total loss, a very enormous loss of water flows with droughts, which have precluded the production of energy, has led to energy failures of output. So then we say to the hydropower industry, really? Is that what you call reliable? That's not a reliable industry if it cannot be counted on for producing electricity. So not only it is unsustainable, but it is unreliable. Another thing that they said in the World Hydropower Congress that is very important is that they should be talking to the engineers of the hydropower industry and telling them to stop saying that the hydropower reservoirs are unsustainable. That really grabbed my attention. I said, excuse me? Why is that? So I'll explain to you what he said. What he said was, what they said, many of them, is that, and then I got the studies that show that hydropower reservoirs have got a lifespan, 30, 50 years. The problem with the accumulation of sediments in those reservoirs, which they stay instead of going to the deltas and keeping the river healthy, and the fisheries happening, and the people being fed because there's a loss of food security and water security all along the rivers because of the sediments that are being stuck in the reservoirs. The reservoirs lose water storage. And this is why they want to create more hydropower dams, mega dams ideally, with mega reservoirs, supposedly for water security, because the dams are getting old, the reservoirs are getting old, and they're getting filled with sediments. So then you have, where is the water security, I ask of you, that the hydropower industry claims, if it's losing water storage in every single reservoir with time? Where's the water security? Where's the water flow gonna come to drive the turbines? Hello, I'm speaking to you, investors. Does this sound like more and more like a really, really bad investment? I would suggest it is. And that you don't need to take a risk of investing billions of dollars into an industry that is not gonna give you a guaranteed revenue. I'm just saying. So then what happens? Then what they're saying, one of the arrangements they all came to, is that there's the 3 R's: refurbish, retrofit, and remove dams. When those dams are filled with sediment, they become useless. So then they're asking now, in the past few years, they've started these programs of removal of dams. The United States has removed about 1,200 dams, not only because they want to restore rivers, but because they're useless and they're actually a real problem because they still hold some water. And as those dams are so old, the concrete in the cement starts breaking. And then they have a tsunami that is going to kill thousands to millions of people downstream. So speaking of sediments that create problems, because one of the huge problems is sediments, it was beautiful. Yesterday, there was this article published by the Global Times, a Chinese propaganda news outlet, that said, oh, the Baihetan Dam, the second largest dam in the world after the Three Gorges Dam, created by CGT, by the same enterprise Chinese dam developer that did the Three Gorges Dam. They just did this huge dam, the second largest in the world. And it's going to produce billions of kilowatts of energy. Yay! And what that does is that it marks the point in which the Yangtze River is a clean energy production ecosystem. Okay, wait a minute. The Yangtze River, according to Chinese scientists, this is no invention here, no extrapolation, has built over 50,000 dams, and it's in the Yangtze River Basin. Over 50,000 dams. And this is what they're calling the clean energy ecosystem. Now, these dams, what they're not saying is that they have created the most incredible environmental and social and economic problems. Local economies as opposed to the GDP, of the country. It has driven to extinction mammals, fish, all sorts of beings. So then they have these aquaculture programs in which, but we put 250,000 little fry from this 5 species of fish. How many species of fish have gone extinct, including the paddlefish and the Yangtze River dolphin on the verge of extinction? Okay, that's for one thing. Another thing that they do not say, and that I asked one of the people that was speaking on the webinar on sediments, this lady that was doing the European study, I said, what happens when they remove the dam? One thing that the studies show is that the removal of dams takes about 3 years and is extremely expensive. Number one. Number two, many countries prohibit the excuse me. Many countries prohibit the flushing of sediments before they destroy the dam, before they remove it. Because what? They're left with some water there, and they're left with a lot of sediments. The problem is that these sediments are often toxic and fully contaminated. So most countries in the world have absolute laws of no flushing of sediments downriver. Why? Because there have been massive fish kills when they have done so. Plus, it has changed the river course by depositing huge amounts of sediments on the banks and destroying vegetation, destroying properties, destroying houses. It has created a lot of problems. Now, the Chinese reported this year, again, a study in which they showed that the Yangtze River Delta is in the biggest trouble possible. They did the study since years ago, since 2012 up till today, this year. And what they found was that the Chinese government, because the Yangtze Delta was also sinking, as the Mekong Delta is sinking right now, and it's an extremely rich agricultural and industrial area, because it's sinking, then they decided to do flushing of sediments from the thousands of dams, They chose dams, the biggest ones, to flush the sediments down, and basically cascades of sediment coming down. And they did manage for a few years to more or less reduce the erosion that was happening and the sinking of the delta, of the Yangtze Delta. However, they of course failed to report the fish kills and the damages that does, but they always do celebrate the wins. The wins is that, we managed to stop it a little bit. However, since 2017, the Yangtze River has gone into an irreversible, destructive mode, and I quote verbatim the words of this study, an irreversible, destructive mode of erosion and sinking. So that delta is disappearing. Problem is that deltas help stop the storms, because the water, when it's full of sediments, is heavier than seawater, and it sort of helps reduce the damage from all these hurricanes and all these problems they have, climatic issues, events such as hurricanes. So it's a storm prevention area, the delta, besides deltas being extremely important nurseries, both for coastal marine organisms as well as for freshwater organisms. It's where a lot in that area, there's all nurseries in other parts of rivers, like the wetlands that they're drying up, like the lakes that they're drying up or filling in for development. that are being affected by hydropower dams. So what happens is that these deltas, which are major hotspots of biodiversity and reproduction, are being collapsed. So that affects not only the river delta, but all the coastal ecosystems hundreds of kilometers away from the delta. So you also have a marine ecosystem impact, just saying. Besides, losing deltas are very good carbon sinks. So your hydropower is losing carbon sinks through deforestation, through the sinking of deltas, through the drying up of wetlands, through the drying up of lakes, through the drying up of floodplains that are being reclaimed for development, right, left, and center, everywhere. And the rivers are being damaged and are not being the carbon sinks that they could be. So I ask you, how is hydropower the best climate mitigation tool? If not only it implies it is conducive to the total destruction and loss of vital carbon sinks, but it also emits vast amounts of greenhouse gases. I rest my case. Thank you.